My guest today is Woody Zuill, and I think a lot of you will have heard of Woody. He's pretty well known in the industry for having promoted the concept of what we were calling mob programming for a long time, but I understand with the revision of his book, we're calling it team uh, team programming or
Software teaming.
software teaming. Thank you.
But I want to make it
Uh,
clear, I'm not the dictator of what people call this thing. So we'll talk about that maybe if you would like to.
well, I'm okay with mentioning that because uh, I noticed that was the thing that actually got my attention. I think it's a better name. For some reason, I think the whole mob programming seems unruly to people, and it makes them sort of inherently resistant to it. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that if I hadn't started out, well, when we really first started needing to talk about this, somebody had contacted me and said, we heard about what you're doing and we'd like to learn about it. And so we didn't really have a name for it then. But our team kind of picked up the name from a joke that I would make when I did coding dojos at user groups. And I would say something to this effect. What we're going to do is we're going to do a kind of a social programming activity where everybody can join in. It's like pair programming, but with more people, like a mob. So that's how I would use it. And I didn't invent that term; it was already around. And then I would say, but we don't want to have an unruly mob. We want to have a ruly mob. And so that was the joke. And I'd fall back on humor a lot of the time just because I'm so uncomfortable speaking in front of people. And that kind of caught on. I never intended to call it that. Once we started working this way, I wanted to, or I was trying to call it. Adjust my thing here a little bit. There we go. I was calling it whole team programming, which comes from the early days of extreme programming, pre-agile. The way people talked about this stuff in the pre-agile times, and whole team means we don't just have a few developers. We have other people who are involved in the creation of software. So, anyways, about the time that I started having to talk about it, I went to a big conference. I was talking on a different subject, and people would come up to me and say, "I want to hear about mob programming," and so that name automatically stuck. So. After 5 or 10 people came up to me during this conference where there was a couple thousand people, I realized I can't spend all day explaining over and over again what mob programming is. So I put a little talk together. And in my slides for that talk, I called it whole team programming. But nobody would switch to that. So I'm not dictating what it's called. Nobody will, that's what I thought. That's how I thought of it. Almost exactly at that time, maybe within a year, I read Amy Edmondson's book called Teaming. Matter of fact, if I turn around right now, I might see it. Yep. I always have a bunch of books on teams. That's Amy Edmondson's book. She's a professor at Harvard. And this book is Harvard Press, I think. It's something else. But anyways, she's great. And I like the way she explains this concept. The concept of teaming is the idea that, first of all, we don't necessarily have long-lasting teams, that often we need to be brought together with other people, start working with them really well, and get the thing done that we need to do. So it's more of a dynamic way of thinking about teams. And then also, it's a verb. It's an active idea. We're teaming on this, whatever work we're doing. So I liked the way that she described it. I liked what she had to say. And one of the things she says is, there's very little in knowledge work. There's very little that we do that's solo work anymore. That almost all the work that we do involves collaborating with other people. Now, the question has become, how effective do we want to be with our collaboration? That's really what mob programming was about. So when we started it, I wanted to call it something different. Nobody liked that. In the meantime, I was perfectly fine with the idea of mob, but there's some parts of the world where mob in the language kind of means to bully. And to do mobbing, you're bullying somebody. And so that wasn't a good match. On the other hand, I don't think anybody would know of this if it hadn't started out as mob programming, because there's sort of a controversial sound to it. And the very first conference, I got invited to specifically speak on this. Um, they wanted something kind of controversial. I had two topics at that conference. They asked me to speak about, one was mob programming and the other was no estimates. Both of those kind of have a controversial ring to them. So there we go. But when I read, so this book came out, I'm going to look, this book came out right about that same time. And it really stuck with me, this concept of teaming. But how am I going to use that for software? But I just internally I thought of this as being teaming, that we are teaming together. I can't see the date in here right now, but we can look that up later. So I've kind of been thinking of it that way, and then it somewhere along the way it dawned on me that this is software teaming. Part of what I didn't like about mob programming was that people would say, "Oh, that's for programmers," but I'm a tester or I'm a product owner,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was I wanted to overcome that idea. So that's where maybe if I could extend it, I'd call it software creation teaming. But that's like kind of too long of a name. Like if you want to have a hashtag, they can't be 100 letters long or whatever. So there we go. So
Right.
that's the story the way that I see it. I'm not trying to make other people call it software teaming. That's just the name I liked, and that's how I'm referring
Yeah.
to it.
If I understand, or if I recall correctly, when you first sort of realized this is what you were doing was on a particular project, and the team included people who were not programmers from the very first day, right?
Yeah, so the people that we were meeting with was mostly programmers and a tester. But very shortly after that, we started including almost immediately the people we might think of as the product owners, the ones we were writing the software for, who had users in their department that were going to use this software. So we
Mm-hmm.
started including. I was thinking of the product owners, the users, the testers, the database people, all as part of this team. While we couldn't get them necessarily full time because I wasn't in charge of that, um, I thought of them as being on this team. And that's how it grew. Matter of fact, we discovered pretty early on if the person that we had a question for was sitting in the room with us, looking at the same code, thinking about the same things, or whatever the documents or artifacts were, we didn't have a wait time to ask, a question. We just got the answer immediately. And we noticed when those people weren't there, everything dragged out. Now we had to send emails, try to track them down. Maybe they're gone today. Maybe they can't meet with them till tomorrow. We lost a lot of time that way. And we start realizing this is critical. If everybody we need to ask a question of is thought of as being part of the team, and we really all work together, we eliminated all of that wait time. And this has to do with the concept of cycle time. We have the time we work on something and then the time we wait. And when you put that all together, you've got the cycle time, the amount of time it takes to go from start to finish on any one bit that you're going to deliver to a customer. So if we're adding a new web page, let's say to an application, and that web page, they need to select which region their distributor is in or whatever it is, and we can't just get it done directly from start to finish, then we've increased our cycle time. We may not have increased our work time because we're going to spend the same number of hours doing the actual work, but we're going to have a lot of waiting time. So if I've got to ask the product owner, the tester, the database person, hey, we need to add a new table to the database, what's that going to take? If I'm waiting to get answers, then we're increasing the cycle time. And that's what's important, not the work time. The work time is usually a fraction of the overall cycle time. Well,
Right.
I
So,
went
and one
on
of the
and on
things
there.
that,
Yeah, go ahead.
oh no, it's okay. Uh, One of the things that I know has changed in our industry since you first started talking about this with people is that as a whole, the industry has gotten quite a bit better at continuous integration and continuous
Yep,
delivery.
yep.
And I would guess, although I've never heard you talk about this, I haven't seen all of your presentations, but I would think that would help facilitate the concept of team
Yeah,
software teaming.
that's a good point.
Has that been your experience? Is that what you're
Yeah,
finding?
so what it comes down to is if you start collaborating well, you'll start seeing the other bottlenecks.
Mm-hmm.
If one big bottleneck is that um, our product owner, we can only talk to him on or her on Mondays, well, that's going to slow everything down, and we don't feel all the bottlenecks that are also there. So if we can't, get something from code to something into staging and something to the customer really directly, we don't feel it as much if we have other big waiting periods involved. And we get used to that. We get really used to the idea that we're not driven by, did we get this done? We're driven by, we're waiting for someone to take a look at something or have a meeting with us or whatever it happens to be. So I think this focus on immediate delivery, one button kind of delivery where we can complete something, hit a button, it's deployed, and somebody's using it 3 minutes after we've hit that button, that certainly can enhance our ability to go directly from start to finish. Because what we're really, to make this work well, the end users are actually collaborators with us. We may never actually directly work with them, because if our application is out on the web and let's just say it's an application that they'll use on their phone, we may never meet most of those people. But there's still just as much collaborators of our process, because we need their feedback. Are they using it? If they start using it, do they keep using it? And if they started using one feature and they kind of stopped in the middle of it and never used it again, is that feedback we can get? And we may not be able to talk to them directly about it. But that's a type of collaboration. Another type of collaboration, the real common one we see, is somebody starts figuring out, well, what would our customers like? And so that action there might involve them bringing some proxy users or real users to come and use some kind of a prototype or a paper example that they're building. These are all collaborative mechanisms, but are they the best collaborative mechanisms, or are they more effective collaborative mechanisms? I just say we have to keep seeking to become better and better at collaborating, whatever that takes. And it doesn't matter to me exactly what it is, but I think that face-to-face, like we're talking right now, and side-by-side is what I like to think with mob programming when we're sitting together. That's a really great way to collaborate. When we have a whiteboard there and a flip chart, and we can go right to it and talk about our ideas, immediately take them to the screen and see them working. And literally, there's almost nothing I have done in 20 years in software that we couldn't get something working within a few hours and keep adding to it a few hours at a time. A lot of the reason we don't get that is because we've become good at accepting those wait times and multitasking. We might have 5 different things we're working on, because while we're waiting for the answer to come back on this one, we don't want to waste our time, so we're working on that one. And when we're waiting for that one and that one, we're working on this other one. And then somebody walks in and says, hey, we need to have this thing done today. And so we set all the other things aside and work on that one. We're working on 8 or 10 or 15 things sometimes, and really not usually less than 5 different things that get our attention. I've worked with companies where they handle tickets. They get a ticket and it says, we got to fix this, or this color is not the right color, or whatever. So they work on it a little bit. Then they send it off into some stack for someone else to look at and determine, did it get fixed right, or do we need to change something? So that is not a very direct collaboration. If we can find a way to go directly from start to finish, what can we do to get that? And of course, one button click deployments, considering who is really a collaborator of ours, everyone who can use the software, install the software, upgrade the software, write documentation about it. All of those people are part of this process. There's a lot to this. Yeah.
There are a lot of parts. I think I mentioned to you yesterday when we were chatting about doing this, that there's a lot to talk about. I know that you have a co-author with your book, and I'm fully anticipating to talk to him someday and discover that we will talk about a whole completely different set of things.
Yeah.
I think that's extremely likely.
Well, that's Kevin Meadows. And it's a funny thing. I had started thinking about writing this book, and then Kevin sent me some research he was doing. He was reading other people's research about pair programming. And he wrote me some ideas that he thinks we could take the research that's been done on pair programming and just simply extend that to more people. So if they're saying there's a financial decision here, And I thought, boy, that's brilliant. And he fleshed it out. And I thought, well, here's somebody I probably should be writing with because he's thinking about different angles, different things. When somebody asks me, where's the research that proves mob programming or now software teaming is effective, my mind goes to, well, why would you need that? So why would you need to read some research about whether or not this is more effective? Because most people who are separating people to do their work, like they say, well, this is the way a lot of managers think, we got to divide the work up. So we're getting many things worked on at the same time, it'll get done sooner. Well, where's the research that shows that is better than working as a team? And I don't think that would be the same research. Somebody would have to do, the exact same research to make that comparison. So it was never very important to me. I don't think that that kind of research is inexpensive or easy to do. And I'm not sure we could do it in any really complete or full way. So I'm more just saying, well, why don't we give it a try? In fact, I learned this a long time ago. Anytime an idea comes forward and we say, oh, that can't work, we're going to be proven wrong, right? So let's stop saying that can't work and just simply find out. And for me, the first time I did something what I would call similar to mob programming and what we were calling mob programming was probably 2003 or 4. And I would work with a tester and what we would call a business analyst. And then I was working as a developer, and we're all sitting at the same computer to get some work done that needed to be gotten done quickly. What I noticed was if I had to get up to speed on the business knowledge for me to logically work on this, it would take weeks. But here I've got somebody who's already got that knowledge. If I were trying to figure out, well, how am I going to test this against the existing code base that we have, it would take me a long time to figure that. But if I've got a tester sitting with us, we're figuring it out as we go. I can open up this development environment, start working on the code. We can use the debugging tools, to look at where things like, different variables are changing value. We're doing that as a team that's with a bigger brain than I have alone or anyone has alone. There's that old saying, I don't know who it came from, that goes, nobody is as smart as everybody. So when you got everybody, you've got more of a brain than you can ever have alone. And I noticed that became very effective. I had so my first earlier cases with it, I was sensing, boy, this is pretty good. This was expanding a little bit on pair programming. But somewhere around 2005 or 2006, I had a chance to do a very important batch of work. And we were given a skeleton crew to do it because they were moving everybody off to a new project, and we needed to do some stuff in this old project. And it's exactly how we worked. Did that for 3 months straight, solid. And the ability to get work done was, amplified a great deal over the way the work had been done before. And that's what convinced me we probably better investigate this. And we started doing it with 5 or 6 people. Now, this is way before what we came to call mob programming, because we started doing that in 2011. But so before I knew about code dojos, which, the concept of a coding dojo as a social activity, 5 or 6 people at one computer. There's other ways to do coding dojos. But yeah, it kind of grew, it evolved over time. And I kept thinking, because this goes way back to the late 90s, why am I on this team when we never do anything as a team? Like, we're working on different things. It's kind of like if I was going to go play tennis with someone and we get to the tennis courts and they walk over to that court and I'm over on this court and nobody's playing, we're not playing a team. If I were going to play doubles and we're not on the same court, we can't do it. If we went to this goes for almost anything you think of like with music. If we're going to go play a gig, and I used to play music for a living a little while when I was young. If we got there and then say, I'm going to play this song, and someone else says, well, I'm going to play that song. And then we start at different times and we end at different times. And it's like we're playing different songs. We're not really a team, but that's what we were doing on this software team. And I asked them, why are you calling us a team? Well, because you're all working on the same features. Well, never at the same time. And it was kind of weird. And I really puzzled me. And I started thinking about that in earnest. I think that was 1999, because I had just come off a place where we were working as a team. And so, we weren't doing mob programming or software teaming, but we were in the same room. We were interacting daily. We would go to the whiteboard together, say, oh, look, I got this problem here. How are we going to deal with that? So, you got to change that in this interface. I'm going to start working on the front end. And we're close enough to be talking throughout the day. So this, for me, it just evolved over time. When we landed on this in earnest, the difference was huge. We went, well, the team had lots of other problems. It wasn't all solved by working as a team, but the working as a team really emphasized how we needed to change things to become more effective. Like what you said, a one-click deployment, that was just being kind of started at that time. In fact, the company I worked with, two companies before that, we were writing our own deployment software so that we could just get the dang things to build automatically. Instead of taking 2 days to build something, it was taking 45 minutes. Nowadays, that would be thought of as being ridiculously long, perhaps. But in those days, that was a big improvement for us. So we were learning those lessons as we went. These all go hand in hand. I was having a conversation with one of the early XP folks just yesterday, and it's interesting to me to hear how they came upon their ideas. That it wasn't a matter of they just sat down and invented a new way of working. They sat down and they were solving the problems of, why is everything so difficult? Why do we always feel under pressure? Why are we not getting things done as directly as we would like to? And they just started experimenting with things. Kent Beck writes about it it's on the back of that book. I can pull it off the shelf here. I don't see it. So where he says, we knew these things were good. How much could we turn them up? Well, that's brilliant, in my opinion. If we're looking at things and we know they're good, can we get more good out of them? How much can we improve them? I think that's a brilliant way to think. And that's what, the original extreme programming concepts grew out of an environment like that. I had heard.
I think
Go ahead.
that's a really good description of that. I pretty often, when I'm thinking about these methodological issues at the meta level, like analyzing the methodology,
Yes.
and then analyzing the process of analyzing the methodology, right? I think about this wonderful book, and I refer to it every once in a while. I just got it off the shelf about 6 months ago, and I went quote mining in it it was published in 1988, I believe, and it's written by Thomas Gilb.
Oh yes.
And the name of it is Principles of Software Engineering, and it's a really great book because you can see in that book, you can see the precursors of the ideas that became Agile, known as Agile development.
Right.
And we were, a lot of us in the industry were thinking and trying to solve these problems of how do we make this process more efficient and more reliable for a long time before, it kind of gelled. Like, a lot of people were trying different things, and some things are working better, and the ideas would sort of spread through the zeitgeist. And then there was this moment when the Agile Manifesto was published, that a handful of really good ideas became described very clearly.
Yeah.
And that really transformed, I think, our industry. But I remember working before that, before the Agile Manifesto was published, I was working on one of these teams. This kind of sounds similar to what you were doing. We were building a big, complicated software for an enterprise. I was working for a commercial vendor, so we were anticipating installing our product on the enterprise servers in those days. And I know that on that project and on other projects, when there's a crisis, people automatically fall into this mode. They get the right people in the room together and talk about it so that they can figure out where the problem is as fast as they can. And that's always been one of the things that intrigues me, is like we do this automatically when there's a crisis. We immediately fall into this mode to solve the problem in the fastest way possible, and then we stop doing it. As soon as the crisis is passed, we revert to something that's more methodical, more predictable, and easier to document. It's really hard to document pulling different people into the room at different times to answer different questions,
Yep.
which is what you have to do in a really big organization,
That's
because
right.
you can't have all of the experts in there all the time.
That's right.
Well, anyway,
So I've
that's been
actually
my
seen that
experience.
quite a
So
bit.
I was intrigued by it.
So,
So you see that too.
yeah, when I first started talking about this at conferences, people would come up to me and say, "We've done something like this." And they'd explain to me pretty much what you just explained. And so I very soon started asking this question: well, why didn't you keep doing it if it was so effective? Well, it was really fatiguing, and everybody, it was too much, and so what they're basically saying is we didn't put in the effort to figure out how to make it not fatiguing, and to make it where it would be naturally easy for us to do. So, like when I was in high school, I ran track. You pick a sport and you do it, and I liked track, so I would run. You don't go out on the field to practice the first day running as good as you're going to run at the end of the season. You're going to get used to building you're going to start building your capability. Now, a lot of people, they'll run throughout the whole year, but in those days, you do something else, and then you come to this season, you start doing that. So you're going to build into it. You're not going to just, if you ran as fast as you're going to run during your peak part of the season, at the beginning, you would fall over and pass out because you just don't have that in you right now. You're going to be pulling muscles. You're going to be hurting your joints, all kinds of stuff. So we understand that type of fitness you have to work into. And why not with this? And this is a big part of it for us. When I started doing the coding dojos, I never had heard of the idea. It's a social activity of coding with other people. Although I've been doing pair programming and things like that, somebody worked out this idea, and I heard it through Llewellyn Falco, who had got it from some folks at a conference, I think back in Chicago. I'm in San Diego. And these folks were from France. So I ended up eventually meeting them, but they had one way of doing it, which was a coding dojo with 5 or 6 people at one computer. And it's basically just rotating a pair every few minutes. And I adopted that idea because the very first time I did it, it reminded me of playing music. It just felt that good. So it's like when I was a kid, the music that I played was bluegrass. So bluegrass, it's sort of a improvisational thing, and it's also sort of it has some standard techniques of interacting. So if you're, let's say you're playing with a group of 5 people. There's a fiddler, a banjo picker, a guitarist, a guitar picker, an upright bass player, and maybe a mandolin player or a dobro player or whatever. So you got these people. And as you play, everybody wants to show off their musical abilities. So, and they get up, and it's part of the variety of the thing. They'll get up and they'll take a break. They call it, So if I'm going to do a kind of a solo, the rest of the band doesn't come up and solo at the same time. They step back and they're playing backup so I can do my best at doing the solo. And then when it's their turn to come forward, I am doing the backup. So between the bass and the mandolin or the banjo, we're providing a kind of rhythm and steady drive when the fiddler's doing their thing. And when we're singing, it's not like we're not all singing lead, we're singing a harmony. So we're going to have a lead singer and what they would call a tenor and maybe a 3 or 4 parts. We're not all singing the same notes, we're doing a harmony. So all of this is kind of the same. And I watched this happening this very first time. And I said, boy, that was the same feeling for me. As we went through these little simple exercises, they were just different code exercises or katas or whatever they call them. And that feeling was important to me. I'd never really done coding as a social activity. When I first started speaking in front of other people, I had a lot of trouble doing that. I'm talking about in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was not comfortable being in front of people, always stumbling on my words and forgetting what I was going to say. So I fell back to coding in front of people. So I would get them to say, what we're going to do today, I get invited to speak at a user group. What we're going to do today is learn how to do different color techniques so your user can get a variety. So we're going to show how to do a gradation here. We're going to show how to do this kind of a thing, how to make your letters morph in color, whatever it was, techniques people were using in those days. And so then I'd open up my computer and I would just start doing it. Now, I actually coded. I would say, well, the first thing we need is this, and I would code it. Now, I practiced that a little bit, but not a lot, just enough to be comfortable doing it because that's the stuff I was doing in my everyday work. I didn't need to practice a lot because I was already doing it every day. Interesting to me was that was easier for me than talking about it because and I relate that back to the music as well. When I was there with my banjo, I haven't told many people this, but it came back to me the other day. If I just get my banjo out, let's say I was in a town I'd never been to before, and I want to meet some people, like this is the days way before the internet, so there's no Twitter. You can't just pick up an app and say who in this town is interested in bluegrass. I could go in, sit down on a park bench in a park that's maybe near a university. There's a lot of little universities in different towns. Somewhere where there's some young people. I was a young person once, and I'd start picking the banjo, and I can guarantee you, without fail, within 10 minutes, at least 2 or 3 people are going to be standing there listening. Within a half hour, 10 or 15 people, and somebody's going to say, oh, I know some folks that would love to meet you. Could you call them? Well, they disappear, go and call someone, come back and say, they're going to be here at 5:00. Now I've all of a sudden got this instant network of people that I get to know. And some of them I still know. That was literally 45 to 50 years ago. Wow. These are people that I could not have known any other way. Well, here I am doing this programming with other people. So just doing it in front of them, that was sort of a beginning of me getting comfortable with it. But now doing it in a coding dojo, instead of going to listen to somebody speak, we're actually getting to know each other. Instead of me sitting next to someone for an hour listening to a talk, and then we go our separate ways to the next talks, we never need to get to know each other. We're actually talking with each other and we're coding together. It's building a friendship that can last a lifetime. The end result of it is we go away with this feeling of fun that goes beyond whatever we might have learned, but we learned a lot at the same time. I used to make a diagram as I noticed things were being learned, and I would just note it. And at the end, we'd have this little diagram of things that got connected up as we did this coding dojo social fun exercise. The first time that I did it was in 2009, and within a month, I was doing my next one, and my next one, I would go to user groups, little conferences, every chance I got. It was building a group of people that I still know to this day, some of them that I met during that period. A group of people who are interested in not just writing code, but in the fun of being with other people that are writing code. I can't describe it. I guess maybe I went off on a tangent there. What I learned, though, in doing this was that I would learn a lot each time I did it. Whereas if I had spent that same time alone, I could learn a little bit, but now I was learning a lot. Is that powerful? I think that's a powerful thing. If I could start like my whole career over, I would have started programming with people earlier because it took me 15 years, literally, from when I started till the last half of the 90s. I always worked alone, never any other way. And then I heard about pair programming. And I thought, well, traditionally, when I was younger, I would say, that can't work. Well, I've gotten to the point in my life where I would say, well, that sounds crazy. I'd like to try it. And so I tried it. And almost immediately I said, I guess I better learn to do this. It took me about 3 or 4 years to learn to do pair programming well enough that it became my go-to way of working. It didn't happen overnight for me. I had to learn, what are the ins and outs of this thing? It's not straightforward. There's lots that can go wrong. You gotta work through the interaction and stuff. It's like you can't just sit down with anyone. It's kind of like if you get a group of friends together and you're going to go watch a movie, that's a lot easier than asking out a specific person on a date to go do something. Now you're under pressure. You're on your best behavior. When you're with a group of friends, you're just doing it. And you can, there's the pressure's off. So yeah, I don't know.
I want to talk to you a little more about the about learning. You mentioned that, and that's always been a part of this puzzle that I find really interesting, and I don't know that it gets talked about very much for an interesting reason. Like it seems like, and I don't know. I assume that most of what you do is for enterprise type clients, right? Um, but it seems to me like as a culture, as a business culture, we have kind of sacrificed the idea of building a brain trust. We sort of fall back on this ISO 9000 style where we think everything can be documented in such detail and according like the documentation has to be according you're not even allowed to have a post-it note on your monitor to remind you of anything, right? If you need to be reminded of something, it needs to be in the documentation, and that needs to be in a particular place, and it's indexed, and they have processes for how to modify the processes, which is good. But I think that what we lose is it becomes very difficult to train to bring new young people onto a team and train them up into the skills that they need to function in a if we just hire somebody and park them at a desk and say start fixing these bugs, here's the Jira ticket tracking system, uh, the process of taking a developer from that point, say they've just graduated from college, they have a comp sci degree, they're ready to rock. The process of getting them from that point to the point where they're the person you want to go to, right? Like the person you want to bring onto your team takes probably 5 times as long. Maybe it never happens for some of them, and it could. And I think that this idea of bringing people together to collaborate with more closely with the product owners, more closely with the graphic designers, that process makes a developer better at being a
Yeah.
developer faster. Is is that
So, yeah, there's an example I like to give of this. So, I think there's a lot we can talk about here. But when we first started, people first started finding out about what we were doing, this software teaming. They would send us an email or call me and say, "Hey, we'd like to learn about it." And I would just say, "Well, why don't you come and spend a day with us?" Well, a lot of people are from around the world and they couldn't just come spend a day, but there was really no remote stuff going on in the same way at that time. So they would come. One of the very first visitors we had came down from Winnipeg, which is a couple thousand miles from here. And, they flew in, they had something else they had to do in the area, but he had called me and said, "I'm coming down there. Can I come and visit?" And so we'd already invited him. He came down. I didn't know if he was a programmer. I just knew that he was interested in what we were doing. And a lot of people who are interested in this aren't necessarily programmers. They're often managers of programmers or coaches or scrum masters or whatever. Anyways, he came and he sat down with us. Morning time. We got about 10, 15 minutes into our day, and he saw some code we were working on. He says, "Oh, there's a better way to do that." I said, "Great." So, first of all, he's exercising his capability. And one of the things we'd already learned by that time is if somebody's got an idea to try, you try it. You don't say, "Explain it to us." Is that might not work? No, that's a waste of time, in my opinion. If somebody feels that something's worth bringing up, then let's do it. And we become good at that over time. Like I have this concept that I like to share. We're always ready to share the right thing at the right time and in the right way. And we get good at that. Not everything we're going to do is going to hit the mark, but a lot of things are worth trying. So if we deny that, if we say that's not going to work, we are really telling people, don't come up with ideas. Let's just be open
mm,
to try them. So somebody on the team said, "Well, let's give that a shot. So can you guide us through it?" So he guided us through it on this little thing we were doing. And it was something new we were trying to learn anyways and have been using for the last couple of weeks, a technique in coding that was sort of new in the world of software at the time. And after we finished that first one, it took us like 15, 20 minutes to clean up the thing we were doing and make it a lot better. Everybody on the team said, "Whoa, this is fantastic." So here's a new person. Now he was already a very competent developer, but we didn't know what his skills were. He had the guts or the boldness to say, "Hey, we could do that better," and the team accepts that. We absorb every idea we can. So when we got done with that bit, somebody said, hey, we did about 20 of these in the last couple of weeks. Can we go through them and you can help us fix them up? So we spent the morning doing that, at the end of which we learned a lot. Our code was in a lot better shape. This new person had learned a lot about our logic because the stuff we were doing really was about how we would get and operate on data. So he knew a lot of the purpose of this application that you would never get from 2 weeks or 2 months of reading the documentation. He got it almost instantly as we went through that morning. Now, he would never work with us again because he had to fly back to Winnipeg. But this really opened up my eyes. And so since then, I've had 8 or 10 experiences that are really worth sharing about how new players, people who really aren't yet competent programmers, become effective right away. One thing I noticed when I was really getting into this industry was you would often take interns and other people would come to start, learning their first steps into the real world of software development. And rather than get them up to speed on doing something useful, you give them the grunt work to do. So it's like, let's take the next generation of brilliant minds and make them so bored with what they're doing that they'll never want to do this. What a technique that is. I think it's silly.
They leave the profession and go get a law degree sometimes.
Yeah,
I've
they want
actually
to go do
seen that
something
happen.
else. Yep. And
Yeah.
so what should we do? And I think that one example I want to give is there was a huge company I'd done a little bit of training with. And they would get in like a couple hundred interns every year, maybe more than that. I don't even know. Well, they had like 8 or 10 interns that they didn't have spots to put them. So what they did is they got think of them as a product owner, but a product expert for some chunk of functionality that had not gotten budgeted for. They didn't budget a team for it. They just took that person and 8 or 10 interns and said, see what you can figure out. They accomplished it. So there was somebody famous like Patton or one of these generals or whatever said, just show people the thing you got to do and leave them alone. You'll be surprised. And they'll do it. And so that's just one example. And I know of 8 or 10, like I was saying, examples of this where people have come back to me and said, this is what we did. I really think that this is a really rapid onboarding mechanism. So I was trained once at a place. For 2 months, I went through training to work on the code base. When I completed that, I started working on some of the grunt work in the code base, but the training didn't do me any good. The code base had changed so much since the training was put together, and nobody wanted to put the time in to redo the training. So I got trained in the wrong stuff anyways. So I thought, boy, this is just a broken system. Here, you're getting training on the real stuff, the current stuff, dynamically, by working with people who are guiding you and are accepting from you the ideas you're bringing forward. I think it's a highly amplified or accelerated learning environment to work this way. Whether you actually, so that's how we started. We when we first started doing this, we realized there was a lot the team needed to learn. And I told them, well, I'm going to set aside 3 hours every Friday and we'll just sit together, all of us, and we'll teach each other whatever we need to learn. Somebody here knows more than everyone else, and that's where we'll start. And so it was up to them to decide how we would do that, what we would learn. It was up to the team to figure out. And a couple of the people had seen me do these coding dojos, and they said, let's do it like a coding dojo, because they always learn a lot in the coding dojos. So off we went. And that's how mob programming, or I'm going to really start saying software teaming. This is literally my first interview since I decided I'm going to make that public.
Oh, I'm honored.
Yeah.
That's
There
so
you
much
go.
fun.
Well, the book, we changed the title to the book and released it out into the world through, one of those big online book selling companies, one of them. Anyways, and we had decided, I'd been wanting to change the name. It was sort of serendipitous that you became interested right away. So thank you for that. So here's the end result is we were trying to learn together, and using a coding dojo to learn together was fantastic. And we started building techniques of learning. Now, there was some training I went to just before this on accelerated learning, just before I went to work at the place where we kind of originated this way of working. Or our manner of this way of working. And they had like 15 or 20 techniques of learning, little ideas that when you apply them in a regular basis, they really amplify your ability to learn. And so we started using some of those. Like we would do the same exercise 5 times. Like we would do it one way, then we would do it another way, and then we would do it another way. And then we could say, how can we mix it up? And we would approach it from every different angle, just forcing us to open our minds to the different ways to looking at things. Now, I'm not claiming that this is the best way to learn. It just brings learning into, the moments by moment as we do the real work. If we get good at learning as we go, we are adding to our abilities every day. If we don't get good at learning as we go, then we're not getting the compounding effect that we get. If you learn a little bit every day, there's a curve to getting more and more knowledge that you don't get if you let's say learn something every 2 months at a workshop or something like that. I think workshops are great too. I just completed a workshop this week on doing workshops because I thought, I have my own techniques. I bet you there's a million more out there. And some of the people that I've learned from in the past are just phenomenal at putting together training materials. I thought, well, I want some more of that. So I got some people that I really respect and had them and took a workshop that they were doing, happened to be this week. And so, yeah, we need to continually improve or we become stale. We become stagnant. There's a lot of research on this, by the way. If we're not continually learning, we are actually decreasing in our capability. And in our industry, I think that's a great deal more than it could be in some industries. Like I used to have a shop where we did a lot of screen printing of signage and markings and stuff. And we identified 42 variables in, if you have a quality problem, there were 42 things we could look at. 5 of them were the most common. So we could go down a tree of what's the problem? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Oh yeah, it's this. Well, what's the thing causes that? We can codify all that knowledge and use it for decades. We're not so lucky right now. This industry is the variables are changing underneath us as we walk. Everything's changing
every day.
every
Yeah,
day.
it's really amazing.
So I've watched. So when I started coding, I coded in BASIC because the machine that I owned was an Osborne 1 or 2. It had the 2 160K floppy drives. That's why I bought it. Like that was really top notch, And it came with BASIC, and it had what was that? SuperCalc, I think, and it had WordStar or something like that. It's like bundled software on little floppy drives. Anyways, yeah. So I learned in BASIC. I don't program in BASIC anymore, but BASIC was a great language then. I wrote a lot of usable software at that time. But by so I started programming in 82 or so. By 1990, I had learned some C. Turned out I didn't like that much. Started learning other languages. Finally settled on mostly Microsoft stuff because that's where the jobs were around here. So I did a lot of Visual Basic programming. I also programmed in. There was a BASIC from another firm, and there was a Pascal style. Lang Borland or somebody had a Turbo Pascal or something like that. So whatever the company was using, you would learn that language. Eventually, C# and Java, JavaScript in the late 90s. Yeah, it's changing. What I did in the early 90s, I don't do it all now. What I would have done in the early 2000s, I learned COM and DCOM. Most people don't even know what those things are, but a lot of what we have today exists because people went through figuring out how this stuff's going. How are we going to talk computer to computer and things like that? As far as this computer using the processing power on another computer, I learned that stuff and I knew it well. Nowadays, I don't use it. Of course, I don't code. I haven't coded in the last 5 years much production code because I'm mostly doing trainings and guiding people through these other things. The learning's a big part of it, so I'm glad we went down that. I would say right now, if you are not taking advantage of people working together, you are not getting that daily value of helping each other learn. I don't know any other way to do it. I read a lot. You can see all these books here. These are the books I was buying. You know, now I buy everything I buy goes onto this thing, right? So it's like I sometimes I'll get a hard copy, but usually it'll be a Kindle and Audible or something like that. And I spend a lot of time when I'm traveling reading because that's a good way to spend the time while you're traveling. But I want to make it clear that the learning together has a side benefit of it helps you learn to work together because we don't have the pressure of the work. When we are learning together, our focus is the learning. And so we're really helping each other. When we're working together, our focus is the work, and we get more pressured in doing that. I've worked with groups that, years ago, where if we were really under pressure, there was less collaboration because everybody was really heads down working on their work. You went to ask a person a question, they have to make a decision. Should I answer their question and get my work done late, or should I get my work done? So they might say, can I meet with you tomorrow? I got to get this done. And so we take away the freedom of collaboration when we work under pressure like that. I noticed this a long time ago. Crunch time is when you really see it. Like, I don't know if anybody gets crunch time anymore, but we used to call it crunch time when you get near the end of a project and your deadline is looming and you know things aren't going to get delivered. And now everybody's working 12 hours a day. I worked at places where we worked 24 hours. People would fall asleep under their desk. It's really miserable. And you probably experienced that too. Uh, yeah. I'm just going on and on. So you bring me back
I
to
have another,
bring me back to
yeah, I have
something we're
another
talking
question
about.
for you. So imagine that there are people out there who work in a sort of more traditional environment for a big organization, and they have traditional teams, and these teams are mostly collaborating, um, through calendars. Occasionally have meetings, go back and do their work, try to get their questions answered, and have the types of delays you're talking about. In a small organization like a startup, if somebody wants to try this, they just try it because there's only
Right.
5 or 6 of them anyway, and most startups start out doing this before they grow and hire
Yeah.
too many people where you can't all be in the same room. When you start a startup, it's usually 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 at the most people working together in, I think, exactly the kind of software teaming model that we're talking about. But in a
Yeah.
large enterprise where they've been 100,000 people for 50 years, you you have a certain amount of resistance to cultural resistance to trying something new and different. How do you go about introducing this concept into a big organization where
Yeah.
the potential advantages could be really substantial, even if they don't do it all the time, even if they don't do it on every team? How do you get the concept in there so that they can do it more naturally once in a while and become accustomed to doing it? Because part of it is you have to practice it a little bit. It doesn't always work great the first day.
No, and I agree. So this is just like with the I talked about running track in high school. I had a coach. Well, what does a coach do on the track team? Well, they're looking at the things and paying attention to the things that you can't pay attention to when you're running or you're in a race. They can see the things from a more holistic point of view or an outside point of view. If my coach would come up to me and say, I noticed what you're doing with your leg there, you're going to injure your joint. You got to straighten that out. Or uh, you're you're saving up your energy for the end of the race. I used to run the 2 mile. Nobody even runs the 2 mile anymore, right? Because they use some other measuring system. And so, but I run the 2 mile. And he said, "Boy, if the last quarter of a mile, you had too much energy. You should have used that energy up while during the race." Well, I'm not paying attention to that when I'm running. I'm mostly paying attention. Can I stay in front of this guy that's behind me? So I can't see these things and notice them. Now you would become more aware over time the more of this you learn. But this is sort of part of this is that we need to have a way to reflect on what we're doing and having somebody who really can help us do it. This thing with having a coach. So when I was hired, to work with the team where we originated this idea, I went to the guy who was going to hire me, and I said, "Look, you've got to protect this team from the rest of the company. We're going to change. We need to change the way we're working, and the team's going to figure that out. We're not going to tell them how to work. We're going to say we're going to create an environment and support you as you figure out how you're going to work. That's hard to do. This was not a big organization. It was 2,500 people, but that's not a big organization. Like you just said, I have done a lot of workshops for big orgs where there's 100,000 plus people. I did a workshop at a place there were 300 people that came to my workshop, which is way too many people, but we found a way to do this. But they had at that time 20,000 software developers in the organization. So our little bit was like, a drip in the bucket. So a lot of big organizations have the resources, if that's the right word, of money. They have the money to experiment. And some organizations do that. A lot of them don't. They're driven by people thinking about the way things should be and trying to make that happen instead of the experiments. It's really got to be experiments. And this is what, a learning organization is about, is being open to continuous experimentation. Whatever we're doing today is going to be different tomorrow. And that goes with the techniques of working. It goes with the dynamics of humanity. We think it's the same, but every little thing we introduce changes stuff. I kind of can picture some guy who looked just like me 150,000 years ago. And he would stand on the top of a ridge and he had a stick in his hand that was sharp at one end. And he'd go like this. And he could see on the top of that ridge over there was some other guy who had a stick that was pointed. And he would go like this. And we're telling each other, we're kind of strong. You don't want to mess with us. Can we come down and do some trading for a while? And so it was like we communicated by seeing each other, hearing each other hooting and hollering, and then agreeing, yeah, we'll hurt each other if we fight, so let's not fight. I'm pretty sure some of my ancestors were good at fighting, and some of them were good at hiding, and some of them were good at communicating. Like there was the whole mix, but you get the picture. We don't get that freedom so much anymore. I communicate with sometimes hundreds of people per day that I don't get to build any kind of relationship with, there's a lot to this. A big organization has got to realize that how we're doing things today is not going to work tomorrow. So how are we going to grow into tomorrow? And I don't have any easy advice for this because, I have a whole series of, I don't know if how I would call it, but thinking that I've done on this, that I talk about. I believe that most organizations are operating with a system that's unique to them. And that system evolved out of wherever they started and whatever they thought they were putting in place. It's not what they thought they were putting in place. The system within the organization grows on its own. After the first day, it's going to be different. We think we designed a system. All we did is put the pieces on the board, and the board started playing its own game. I read a book by a guy, I think it was called Game Changers, but he says, if we don't understand that we're playing a game, we can't change the game. We have to understand we're already in a game. I thought that's a great point of view. I'd have to look up the name of the guy. I talked to him a couple times, and it's really a great thinking. My point, though, is that these big organizations that have the resources to really grow into tomorrow, the system itself is against them. So in systems thinking, I'm not a systems thinker as such, but I honor these concepts. The books I've read on it basically all say something to this effect, that you cannot change the system and have it do something you want it to do. You can make changes, but you can't predict the results. You may not even see the results. And people like Kevin Meadows, who said, at best, you get a temporary change. At best. And I really like John Gall, who wrote many years ago. He wrote, invariably, a working complex system evolved from a working simple system. And most simple systems don't work. So that's like the concept of evolution, really. And if that's true, all of these folks going around saying, we've devised a system, if you just learn to do this, everything's going to be great. I think that we're fooling ourselves, or they're fooling us, because I'm pretty sure it can't be. I'm pretty sure that can't be. So how do we do this? A friend of mine, a colleague, so to speak, Michael Sahota, in 2013, I read an article by him, and he described the concept I was using. Not he didn't write. I don't think he was writing about me. He was just writing about his own thinking. But he called this the culture bubble. Within an organization, the organization overall is just full of all kinds of cultures. It's not like here's the organizational culture. We don't have such a thing. Every individual, every small group has learned how to operate within this overall organization, and it's going to be different from person to person, group to group, whatever. He could envision we would have these culture bubbles. So I started mentioning this a while back. I went to my boss and said, "You've got to provide me this umbrella," I was calling it, where the rest of the company won't know we're trying to figure out how to work better. They still operate the same way. Now, this was just a theory. It's still just a theory. Nobody's going to live long enough to prove anything with these kinds of ideas. What can we do? And I said, I'll come to work for you if you can provide that. And he did. So conceptually, you have adapters. If somebody comes to us to get something done, it's got to look like it used to look like for them. Under the covers, it's not going to be the same at all. So my boss took some of that on himself. A few of the other managers took on some of it themselves, and I took on some of it. So the managers of other teams doing other things, and my manager, we all kind of had created a department-wide kind of bubble that would block the rest of the organization from interfering with the experiment we were doing. And that experiment really was based on 4 or 5 things that I think are important. One really important thing is the people doing the work can best figure out how to do that work. We cannot go in and tell them how to do it. Now, that might be for some work and maybe not for others, but in the kinds of work that I do, my experience has been we've hired these brilliant people. Let them be brilliant. Let's stop trying to tell them how to do things. I've actually seen an organization, you hire these brilliant people, you tell them where they'll sit, who they'll go to meetings with, what their tickets they're going to work on, who they get to interact with, and how they get to interact with them. I've been at places where if you want to get database work done, you have to document it, submit it. They would have their committee meeting. 2 weeks later, you would hear back, "Oh, this isn't going to work. You don't want to do this." And you have to reframe it. It's like it takes you a month to get a column indexed or to argue for having a new foreign key or whatever. And so I don't know if any of your listeners remember the days when foreign keys weren't something you just set on your database. You have to actually write code to. It was just an idea. You had to write code to enforce the foreign keys. Anyways, you get the picture. So what I'm getting at is if we can protect the team from the interference of outside of it, they can figure it out. These are brilliant people. They might need help because they're not used to being given that freedom. So we can't just say everybody's going to be autonomous. Well, what does that mean? Autonomy really means we're self-governing or something like that. We'd have to look it up. Please don't quote me on that one. But it kind of means we're in control of making these decisions. That doesn't mean each individual gets to do what they want. Like everybody walks up to the mic and starts singing a different song. We need to work together. That was one of the things. Another one is I have to have the right as their manager to cancel work. My philosophy for a long time has been, if you're late on something, you probably shouldn't be working on it. Why did we choose to work on this thing if we couldn't be getting it done? So let's figure out what this is about. Usually it means there were a lot of bad decisions made along the way, and we weren't really ready for this work. So why keep working? That's the sunk cost fallacy, right? If we're going to keep working on this thing because we've already spent $200,000, so we got to get it done. We budgeted $200,000, and now that money's all gone. We got to get this done, and we just keep throwing money away at it, and pretty soon we spent $1 million. And for what one company I worked at, we calculated because they never gave us the money, but we counted the number of developers and we knew how much they were getting paid and what their load was, what it cost them. They spent about $75 million to do something that never really worked. And I, kept thinking jokingly, I could have written you something that doesn't work for half that price. It's like,
yeah, that's a real money.
it's like, Yeah, this is silly. So another thing is we need to learn how to write code that's easy to maintain, easy to change, easy to add stuff to, easy to delete when we don't want it anymore. And all their code was like tightly bound, and uh, there was no cohesion. Uh, you could look at one class and it was like did 20 different things, and all those is breaking all the rules. There were a couple more things, but one of them that I think was really important is we need to learn how to collaborate. So I expressed all those things. We were given the bubble in which to do that. It took us about 6 months from zero to software teaming. And the minute we started software teaming, we all looked at each other kind of like, it was just purely by accident. We'd gotten together in a room to look at something, and we started working on it instead because we'd been doing these coding dojos and getting used to working together. And everybody on the team said, well, that went really well. Let's do it again tomorrow. That's one of the things we were doing as a daily retrospective. At the end of every day, we would just ask each other, what went well today? Take 5 minutes to do this. Ask what went well today. And somebody would say, oh, this went well. And okay, well, what was good about it? And they would say, how can we get more of it tomorrow? And then the next morning we say, this is the thing we want to get more of today. And then we build on it. So with mob programming, literally after the first day, how do we get more of it? Let's just book some rooms and get together during the day, whenever we can. After a week, we aligned all of our schedules, so we were together most of the day. After 2 weeks or so, we found our own little office, not any much bigger than this room I'm in right now, and set it up to work as a team. And we didn't stop. So really, after the first day, I still have my records of our meetings. We started working together as much as we could every day, doing this. So giving the team the freedom to learn together, to learn how to get along together, to learn how to break work down into smaller and smaller pieces so they're deliverable day by day instead of week by week or month by month. Some of the projects they were working on were 6 months, a year late. That's work you shouldn't be doing. Anybody who comes to me and says, yeah, we're really having a problem, we're late on this project, that's the first thing I want to look at. Are you really interested in this? Like if I'm hungry, I go eat something. Like if I wasn't interested in eating, then I could put it off. You're putting it off by being late. And if you think you're late because you're going to come up with excuses, fill in the blank, that's not what it is. It's really, this isn't stuff we should be doing. We made a bad decision somewhere along the way. Let's cut our losses short. Go on to something that's valuable.
I forget who it was, but somebody has this wonderful contribution to our industry, and you might recognize this when I describe it. But it might be well, I don't want to guess and get it wrong. But what they basically say is that every software project represents the cumulative total of an extraordinarily large number of very small decisions. Most of them, some big decisions, but mostly a lot of really small ones.
Yeah,
and that you basically get, there's this value embedded in a software system that is the value of the cumulative decisions that were made to get there.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, whatever you can do to make those decisions faster is going to lead. I mean, ultimately, it's about revenue, right? It's, for any of these organizations, all of these software products either directly or indirectly support the mission of the organization, and usually that is measured in revenue terms. So if you can make those decisions faster, if you made the wrong ones, you find out faster.
Yeah.
And then you can correct them. So whoever this is, whose name I can't remember, basically, they basically think that we should, as an industry, be focusing on how do we identify those incorrect decisions as fast as we possibly can. And the way to do that is usually build it and put it in front of the user.
So get it into use. So I had these maxims I followed for years. Back in the 90s when I was trying to figure stuff out, of my first shot at it, I would get a batch of knowledge and I'd say, what would I call that? And then I'd write a little 5 to 10 word description of what that thing was, so that I didn't have to. So when I was talking with someone else about it, I could just use a few words. And a big part of it is, if we can't learn quickly that we're going down the wrong path, then we're going to go down that path a long, long time, a long ways. one of the early projects I worked on that was really late. They called me in because a key developer quit, and they said, we don't know what to do. And the key developer told me, well, call Woody, because he's been telling, they brought me in every week or every month, once a month, to guide them a little bit. This was in the year 2002 or three. And I said, call Woody, he's been telling you what to do. And this woman who was the lead developer was leaving, and on the doorway out, she told the boss that. So he called me, and I came in, and nobody likes this, but this is the way it often is. I said, we can't work on the stuff that you've done over the last year. This is such a mess. You don't understand it. How do you think I can understand it? So let's just go back to the code base, the way it was the day you started making changes.
Mm.
And then let's take one thing that you want and get it done as quick as we can. Now, this was the beginning of me being able to apply
That's why
this.
God invented Git cherry pick, by the way.
What's that?
There's this feature in the repository Git called cherry picking. Some people don't use it, but I think it's wonderful because you can do things like that even as an experiment. You can say, okay, we're way off track. Let's go back to this point where we know we were still on track. And then we pull in the pieces that we're pretty sure work, and we look at each one of them as we're going. And eventually you get to the one that didn't work, right?
I like that. I like that. So that's kind of the same thing. In this particular case, back to day one, but they had reasons that probably was better. But, whenever I'm called in on something, they've gone down the wrong path a long ways. And so often this is just the most direct route to it. If there was a way I could just cut it in half and say, okay, let's go to here, that would have been a good thing. But in this case, it probably was better. We went back to square one, actually. So the point being that once we got that first little thing I just asked them, I said, what is one thing? There was like 80 things they were trying to accomplish. What's one thing that's most interesting to you? I usually use a chunk of a pad of paper to demonstrate this, but I don't see one here. You take their 80 pages or 100 pages of feature descriptions, pull out one and say, is that the one? Okay, explain it to me. I can't understand all that. Let's pick out what I do understand. I kind of understand that. Is that useful to you? Yeah. So that's what we're going to work on for a couple days, just to see what kind of progress we can make. I'm pretty confident usually that we can get through any little bit quickly. And once we do, we can put it into use. So they had gone a year without having any of this new functionality is being added to an existing project, without any of this new functionality bringing value. And so now, in 1 week, and literally it was 1 week, we really got the important parts of this new little bit we got done in a few hours. And I took the boss and say, is this kind of like what you want? And he said, yeah. I said, well, I'm going to make sure we can get it in good working shape. I was already pretty confident, but we spent a few days making sure we weren't breaking anything else because they didn't have unit tests in place. I started adding tests, and we put that into production. Now, I'm not going to give too much away here about who or what this was, but it was a small medical clinic software thing. And they were using it in their own clinics, and it was going to be available to other clinics. Immediately, this little bit that they wanted was making them something like 10 or 20 grand a week, because it was allowing them to do work that would take months to recoup the cost of. So they were all of a sudden, now that wasn't a big difference to their bottom line, but it was sufficient to say, yeah. So we did that for about 3 weeks. At the end of 3 or 4 weeks, I said, okay, what's the next thing here? So we went through thing by thing, and out of 80, we got 4 of them. And then I said, well, what's for this week? They said, well, there's this other chunk that we want to start on. This is good enough for now. And that exploded my brain. At that very moment, I thought, that's what this is all about. So this is like the early days of Agile. So 2003, Agile been around maybe 2 years. Hardly anybody knew of it. I said, okay, pick one thing, get it done, see if you liked it, adjust if needed. And pretty soon you'll discover the things you wanted, and the rest of it you won't care about. And I started calling that, deliver features until bored. Because when they became bored with the stuff they thought they wanted, it's like a kid that 2 days after Christmas, you know which toys they really wanted. because those are the ones they're really playing with. And the rest of them were like, they thought they wanted them, but once you got them, the newness wears off. Now, as a kid, we didn't get that many Christmas presents, so we used every toy until it couldn't be used anymore. But you get the picture. So the point here, though, is that the real value of working this way isn't that we got stuff done better, or like use the words quicker or faster, but that we were able to make those decisions about what do we want next sooner. So that's the point that you were making. It's like, that's the info we need to make real decisions. And we never get to get that information till we start delivering something. We literally put that into real users' hands. By the end of the first week, we could have done it maybe at the end of the first day, but by the end of the first week, and then we could get real feedback. Yeah. And we only given one part. This one page had 3 different parts to it. We got the one part done. The next week, we were able to get the next 2 parts done. And each week we got about that much done. And if I go back, that was like, in my past, that was like the big aha moment. So in the Agile Manifesto principles, it says simplicity is the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. I don't know who said that, but it's brilliant. That's what it just hit me right then. This is all that work they did, they're never going to get value for. They shouldn't have done it. We should have had some little path that would take us to what you wanted most. And it starts by just doing something you want. It doesn't have to be what you want most. A lot of people say, work on the most important thing. How do you know what that is? Just get something you think is important. Let's do that. In doing that, we will learn what's most important over the next few weeks or months. And a lot of product experts will say, but we need all of this. That kind of thinking, I think, destroys projects. The thinking we need all of it before the customer can see it. I have an extremely good real life example where these folks had a great idea that would have made them lots of money if they just got it out. But every week I would go and I worked with them only on weekends because it was my weekend work. And I would say, let's just get this out on the internet. Well, no, we need to add this. Next week, we need to add that. By the time they were ready to deploy, someone else had beat them to it.
Oh,
and
wow.
and that firm, I won't mention company names, that firm hit it big. Now, I don't know how they're doing now, but for the period this was in, the early 2000s, that company hit it big with this thing. And this guy could have. I actually was telling him, look, they call it nowadays, some people call it a concierge service. It looks like it's software, but when the request comes in, a human gets it, reads it, sends back a response. We could have done that kind of stuff with this. And I'm pretty sure the other firm did. Matter of fact, the way they described how they got to what they did that's exactly what they did. They
Those types of software systems are sometimes called a mechanical turk
yeah,
because it's a person behind a robotic,
yeah,
software front end.
yeah,
And there are a number of them on the internet. Some of them that people sort of understand that's what they are, and then there are some that are people are faking an AI back end.
yeah,
And the problem that they ran into was that their business model and their funding from Wall Street, even though it was very substantial, it didn't scale when they started getting a large number of customers. The one I'm thinking of, uh, they they basically needed so many trained experts in a particular subject that happened to be accounting on the back end that it basically imploded. Like they couldn't get enough Wall Street funding to both build the AI system that was going to replace these people
yes.
and also have the call centers full of these people that were doing the work secretly.
So if you're
Uh,
not taking risks, you're not gonna you're never going to learn anything. So, sure, we're going to make some mistakes doing this kind of thing. But I would say in this particular case, if we would have just got it out there, um, they would have had plenty of money coming in to solve all the problems they needed to solve, because it could all easily been done with software. They just didn't have the money to buy or produce all that software up front.
which they
And
would have, in that case, they probably would have had if they'd put it on the market. They would have got a revenue stream to fund that development.
exactly, I think
Yeah.
up to the point while I was with them, it was all coming out of their pocket and money they had borrowed from their folks. And this wasn't a particularly young guy, probably in his 30s. Money he had gathered from whoever he could talk into giving him money, and he was using it up. He could have really had a product that, again, he may not have had the acumen to turn it into something really valuable, but he could have got a lot of users and maybe sold it off to someone who could. I don't know. A big part of the problem with business is if you just follow what somebody else is doing, yeah, that's all you're gonna have in it. I'm not an entrepreneur by any means. I've always kind of just owned my own job. Going back to when I was pretty young, I've worked with other people, for other people quite a bit, but I've also had a lot of small businesses. I counted the other day, I had at least 16 small businesses. When I was really young, I had a couple lawnmowers and a pickup truck. I hired a couple kids at school. I was 16 years old. I would go into a neighborhood and mow lawns. I could just go door to door, find somebody who wants their lawn to be mowed, and off we go. Um, that's a cash flow business, and we're talking about the same thing. If you had to wait till you could buy a brand new pickup truck and had the resources to buy a couple brand new lawnmowers, then you may never get started. I could buy a junky lawnmower and make it run. I know how to sharpen a lawnmower blade. I know how to make a spark plug work, So
That's funny. I mowed a lot of lawns doing exactly that when I was a kid.
Exactly. So if you don't know how to sharpen a blade, it really looks like a mess. So you learn the little things you need to learn. And so the thing is that I'm not wise in how you make a lot of money doing this. I'm just saying I've seen some opportunities where people missed the chance. I actually like the idea of starting with where you're at. And if you can generate enough money to go the next week, you can build on that. And if you can generate a little bit more, you can build on that. This is just the idea of each step you take is going to give you one or two things. One is you're going to get some knowledge for sure. The other thing is you might get some cash. The cash is necessary to be sustainable. In fact, I just read a quote from Warren Buffett. Now, here's a guy who knows how to build wealth. He said, I look for sustainability. Do they have stick-to-itiveness in this company? Because if they can keep this going, they can become profitable. But if they can't, that it's never going to be generated. So that's sort of what this is about. Again, I'm not an investor. I don't know anything about that stuff. If I was starting all over again today, though, I would definitely figure out how to work with other people sooner. It took me 15 years to get to where I even heard the idea. And then I said, okay.
I have one more topic that I'd like to ask you about if you have just a few more minutes.
Sure.
And this one, who's going
to listen to all this? Come on now.
It's funny. I actually have some friends who really enjoyed. As I've told you, you're only my second guest, which is not strictly true. I did one other interview that it was 3 hours long, and I have to figure out how to repackage it because that's way too long.
That's way too long.
But it was so interesting that I don't know how to cut it up into pieces. So I'm still working. He'll be the third or fourth episode by the time I get it edited and published. But the friends of mine who listen, they're all programmers, almost all of them, and they really enjoyed it. And I was sort of surprised at all the positive feedback I got from the first episode because I didn't think anybody would hear it. So that was really fun. And I think now, since you have a new version of your book coming out, it's pretty likely that a few more people are going to hear this conversation.
Yeah.
But I hope they listen to the end because this part, I think, is one of the most. I hope it'll be one of your most interesting answers because I don't think it's something anybody else is likely to ask you, although maybe they would. So I have talked to you in this conversation so far about my experiences that resonate with the way that you're working. But I will confess, in percentage terms, very little of my experience is done the way that with the work style that you're talking about. And there's a really interesting reason for that. It's because I started my own company years ago, 1998. And from that moment on, I was working with virtual teams. And we did have an office the first few years in downtown Minneapolis in the warehouse district. And about half of our team was there, but the other half was scattered all over the country. There was no other place in the country where more than one person was. And this was before Zoom and FaceTime, right? I mean, it was phone or email, and then eventually text messages, which was a big productivity gain. So most of my experience comes with working to make virtual teams work in the way that you're describing.
Oh.
So when we have little problems, like we all have a lot of experience. Especially now, but even then, like we were working on projects that gave us a tremendously intense initial start in our career. We were working on these big, challenging problems with small teams of sharp people that were doing what you said, sleeping under our desks and stuff and working through the weekends. And in those days, we called them hackathons, the term that you use for coding dojos, right? And we came up with those ideas because we would get together on weekends and play video games sometimes.
Right.
And so anyway, and that was before we started our own business. We were working in a big office, and we would come in on the weekends and play video games. We're like, well, nobody else is here but us, and we're getting a lot done. Like we would solve network problems and all this kind of stuff with the infrastructure to make the gaming experience better, and that made the business environment better during the week. And so anyway, that kind of thing, I think, naturally evolved into coding dojo type
Sure.
experiences.
Sure.
But anyway, because we had this virtual team from the very start of our company, we've spent a lot of time thinking about how do we make these, and personally also learning, like when I know I need a question answered, how do I identify the right way to get that question answered as soon as possible? We don't have any such thing. Like for a lot of our projects, we have an issue tracking database, but at least half of the issues get solved without ever going in through a ticket system.
Yeah.
Because it's just, it doubles the time.
Yeah, more than doubles the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in my opinion.
So in fact, the things that we tend to track are things that we want to know about later, right? So if it was just a small thing and it's embedded in the code and you don't ever need to reference it again, it never gets a ticket. It just gets identified and fixed.
So making it so that that's the way we work all the time is worth considering. Is that something we can turn up the good on? How much can we change the way we're working so that we, this is part of the zero bugs kind of concept. How can we make it so that something that's got to be taken care of just gets taken care of? We don't need to track it because it automatically gets, moves to the top of the list. Even that we have a list that we need to move things to the top of is problematic. That's something I could talk through a great deal. But so what do we want to cover here? I didn't quite.
Oh, well, I guess I'm curious to know about your thoughts about taking the software teaming paradigm, which in the way that you practice it is in a room. It's like a war room. Like I said, we do this naturally when we have a crisis in a big organization. We get the people in the conference room together until the problem is solved.
Right.
And then we stop doing that as soon as the crisis is over.
Yeah.
But the experience that I have is trying to apply these same kinds of principles to a team that's virtual. And I've been doing that since 1998, just out of necessity. That's just the way that we were formed. But now that we have, the plague, basically, like, this experience where we had a long period of time where people were safer and more productive if they could be isolated physically from each other. It forced Zoom to get better. It forced Slack to get better. Both of those tools were ideas before COVID hit. They were not really very good tools. And now they're robust.
They're much better, yeah. Well, so first of all, collaboration doesn't mean we have to be sitting in the same room. So now we can collaborate just through emails. Like in a traditional book writing and publishing process, an author might work on, let's say it's a nonfiction business book or something. They may work on various chapters for quite a while before anybody looks at it. Then an editor looks at it and makes some suggested changes. Then they get that back and they work on it alone. And it can go a long period just communicating through sending documents back and forth to each other and marking it up to work on it. So, yes. So how effective do we want our collaboration to be? So when we're working remotely, we can still be talking just like you and I are right now. So in 2011 or 12, we had a situation, where we originated this work, where somebody needed to work from home for a while. And then I had a situation where I needed to be away for a while. My dad was in the hospital and I would spend every other day with him. And one of my brothers would spend every other day with him so that he always had somebody there, that's close to him to help take care of him. And so we had to figure out how to work remotely while still getting things done. Somewhere along the way before that, I'd started pair programming remotely. And what we're doing right now is very easy to do. You can share a screen. And there's many other ways to go about doing this. Uh, if you both can have easy access to the same code base, you can easily switch back and forth by pushing your stuff to a repository and the other person picking it up. With mob programming, we often would use a timer to switch the person who's at the keyboard. With pair programming, I never really did that. It was always somebody saying, I don't want to type anymore. And then the other person takes the keyboard. So with the model that I follow, the person at the keyboard isn't the one programming, the other person is. The person at the keyboard is acting as the input mechanism into the code base. So, but with pair programming, it can be a more conversational. When it's a group, we found that it's better to just have that person at the keyboard. They're focused on taking the idea that others are sharing and getting it into the keyboard. They're not doing much of the thinking. So when we do this remotely, it's kind of the same thing. If we had 5 people here right now, and let's just say I'm at the keyboard, and the rest of you are guiding me, saying, well, we want to drop down. And that drop down is going to have a list of the regions. So I know how to make a drop down show up. And then I go, where do I get the regions? And the database person's going to say, that's going to come from a table we just created. And you've got to do a query or whatever it is that we use nowadays against that data. And so, yes, everybody collaborating, it happens just as well remotely. We need to pay a little bit more attention to the protocol because it's easy to talk over each other. The way these systems work when we're sitting together, we kind of like shaking the spear on the top of the ridge. We've been speaking together with people for millennia. We have been using virtual meeting stuff for a few decades at the most, maybe. I remember in the 90s using mechanisms that we could pair program, almost like what we're doing here. And it really became something during the 2000s where, Skype and stuff like that started coming on. And we could sit with other people and work side by side, but, remote. So it works very well this way. As soon as the pandemic hit, literally March 1st, 2020, I was on a plane coming back from Norway. I had just done some workshops in Norway, and I was seeing flights were getting canceled everywhere, and I knew this is not good. So luckily, at that time, getting back to the U.S. for U.S. citizens from overseas was pretty straightforward. So none of my flights were canceled. I got home directly, but I immediately called everybody and said, I'm canceling upcoming work. We'll figure out later how we're going to pick this up. And then I started getting calls from people saying, we got to work remotely. How do we do that? And so I started guiding people on this. And not that I have any special knowledge, but I'm really good at working with
you
people.
figure it out pretty quick when you have to do it, right?
That's right. I'm pretty good at saying, well, what are we going to try? Let's try this today. Let's try that. People come up with their ideas and we would try them. And what really works well is we don't. So with the way we worked when we're sitting at the same table, we would often change whoever's at the keyboard every 5 minutes or less, sometimes as much as every 10 minutes. Some teams, they don't switch at all ever. They switch when somebody says, I don't want to type anymore. Doesn't matter. We would take a longer time person at the keyboard. And then we started using these folks in Germany had written this thing called mobsh, which is a shell script for using Git. You hit a button and basically you type in, Git next or mob next, and that will check in your code to a temporary branch. It would make it ready for the next person to use it. They do mob start, type that in, and it just automatically brings everybody to their machine. So the one person who's driving, in 10 seconds, the next person could be driving.
It switches back and forth.
Yep.
Yeah,
So if we had, let's say we had 5
clever.
people.
I didn't realize that existed.
So you can put that in the notes for this. These folks have a website called remotemobprogramming.org. And Seaman Harris, I think that's his name, he kind of, with a few other people, put together a little booklet that you can get for free online. And you can read it's all on their website. It's easy to find. They had a lot of great ideas like that. My preferred method, which I've become aware of over this last 2 or 3 years, is we use a remote server that contains the development environment and everybody has access to. And so the team can easily hand off. We don't need to check stuff in, or we don't need, it's just like sitting next to each other. It's my turn, then that person relinquishes the access, the keyboard, and I use it. Now, we don't even need to share our screen as far as the work we're doing, because everybody's looking at if you got 2 or 3 monitors, everybody's looking at the same work being done. The lag is pretty much non-existent, and that works pretty good. You use something like, it's called AnyDesk, and tools like that allow everybody to log into that same development environment. And it's very much like working, say, it side by side at a table, where our computer's on the floor with a bunch of really powerful hardware, all the software you need, instant access within our internal network to the databases and other things that we use. So this can be done too. And I think that works rather well. Don't have a lot of experience doing that, because it's not a lot of people that have been doing it. So, but I experimented with it a bit and I really liked it. And I know some people that do it all the time. And the show Mob Mentality, these folks do a video cast. It's Chris
I don't know that
Lucian
one.
and Austin. Forgive me for forgetting Chadwick. I think. Let me get a name straight. Please give me a moment. I hate to extend this, but you can cut this out if you want. But let me quickly, because I have so many names bouncing around my head right now. Austin Chadwick. Him and Chris Lucian. Chris is one of the original mob programmers from our team when we first started, and Austin joined a bit later. Anyways, they do this. They have a website, a video blog, and they have a Trello board or whatever, where you can read and look at all kinds of stuff. And they have hundreds of podcasts just on this. It's video interviews. And you can get that. So they've got a lot of knowledge on working this way, because I believe they have or do work this way. There you go. So anyways.
Excellent. Well, thank you for the tip.
Yeah.
And Woody, I've taken up plenty of your time today. I really appreciate it. It's been a really fun conversation for me, and I think that the listeners will enjoy it too. You have decades of wisdom, and you know how to share it. So that's
well,
that's really nice.
I've got decades of experience distilled down to a little tiny bit of wisdom.
Yeah, okay.
Because I really I'm literally standing on the shoulders of giants, as the old saying goes. So little of this is original with me. Everything's based on what I learned from doing with others and reading and stuff like that. So I can take almost no credit.
It's a valuable service to the industry and the community to distill that experience down into a book. And I'm glad that you've revised your book for the most recent years of experience that you have with this. And I'll put a link to your book in the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day, and thank you for being on the Free Birdseed podcast.
Thank you very much.